I was sitting in my favorite chair in the living room, the one that creaks every time I lean back, when the phone rang. It was a regular ringtone, just like any other, but something about that sound seemed to pierce the air differently, as if announcing that what was about to happen would change the course of my life. I answered without thinking much, already smiling even before putting the phone to my ear. My daughter's call always brightened my day, or at least it did until that moment. On the other end of the line, silence. Not a comfortable silence, but a heavy, oppressive silence, the kind that makes you hold your breath. And then, with an almost trembling voice, my daughter said exactly the words I never expected to hear. "Dad, please, don't come to the new house." At that moment, my world stopped. My hand gripped the phone involuntarily, my muscles locked, and for a few seconds, I simply couldn't answer. I've known her since the day I first held her in my arms. I know the tone she uses when she's sad, when she's tired, when she's anxious, but something was different. Something I couldn't immediately identify, but that put my heart on alert. "What do you mean, my daughter?" I managed to ask, trying to keep my voice steady. But inside, everything was falling apart. She took a deep breath, as if she were about to say something else, but she didn't. She just repeated, "Dad, just don't come, please," and he hung up. When the call ended, I stood there, staring at the blank phone screen, as if the answer to what was happening might appear there, written somewhere. My thoughts raced in every possible direction. I tried to remember if I had argued with her recently, if I had said something wrong, if I had failed to help with something. Nothing, absolutely nothing justified such a strange request. I felt the strangeness like a weight on my chest. It didn't make sense. My daughter had always been open with me. She always told me everything, from school problems to adult dilemmas that arose years later. And now, out of nowhere, she was asking me not to go see the house she had fought so hard for, the house she had described with enthusiasm just a few weeks before when she said, "Dad, you're going to love it. The kitchen has that big window you like." How could someone who has waited for this moment simply say they don't want you there? What could be so serious, so hidden, so forbidden, that would justify her pushing me away like this? These questions began to torment me immediately, and the more I thought about them, the more others arose, forming a mental labyrinth that I couldn't decipher. Why would a daughter prevent her own father from seeing her new home? Was it fear? Shame? A fight with her husband? A complicated financial situation? Or, even worse, some disappointment she was trying to hide from me? As these questions piled up, so did the pain. It was a silent, deep pain, as if something inside me had been ripped away without warning. I felt shame, I felt confusion, and above all, I felt an emptiness I never imagined feeling because of her. Yet, amidst all of this, there was one detail that caught my attention: her voice. That voice wasn't angry. It wasn't cold. It wasn't aggressive. It was scared. Yes, scared. And that detail was enough to transform my insecurity into worry. I felt that something was wrong. Very wrong. And then the initial shock began to transform into a dangerous mix of paternal instinct, curiosity, and a restlessness that wouldn't let me breathe properly. I stared at my front door as if, at that very moment, I should get up and leave. Part of me wanted to respect her request. Another part, the part that knows my role as a father, screamed that something was at stake, something I perhaps needed to see with my own eyes. I closed my eyes and relived the moment she hung up the phone, the way her voice faltered, the way she asked. It wasn't an angry plea, it was a desperate one. And when a request seems desperate, the worst thing to do is accept it without question. There, sitting in my old chair, I realized I was facing a dilemma no parent wants to confront: to obey my daughter's words, or to obey my instinct to protect her, even if she doesn't say what she needs protection from. I took a deep breath, rested my elbows on my knees, and held my head in my hands. And, in that instant, the question echoing inside me felt like a stone in my stomach. What is my daughter hiding, and from whom? The shock of the call wasn't just in the request. It was in the clear, almost palpable, feeling that she couldn't tell me why, as if something or someone was nearby, listening, controlling, pressuring. The way she spoke, the haste to end the call, the silence before and after the sentence, everything pointed to that. What if she were in danger? What if someone was manipulating her? What if she was going through something she was afraid to tell me? These thoughts grew until they became impossible to ignore. It was at that moment that I realized That phone call didn't just change my day, it changed everything. It changed my perception. It changed how I saw what was happening. It changed my relationship with the truth. And above all, it changed my certainty that my daughter was okay. When I finally got up from the chair, I felt like I had made a decision without even verbalizing it. I needed to know. I needed to understand. I needed to find out what was happening behind that strange and painful request. I needed to go to the new house, even if she didn't want me to, even if it meant facing something I wasn't prepared to see. In the end, no father can stand idly by when his heart warns him that something is wrong. To understand the strangeness of that phone call, we need to go back in time a little, to before all this began. Because nothing, absolutely nothing in my history with my daughter, justified those harsh and unexpected words. We've always been close. Not in a forced way, but in a natural, almost intuitive way, as if we had an invisible line connecting us since the day she was born. I remember the moment I first saw her, wrapped in a light blue blanket that the nurse placed on my lap. She was so small, so delicate, but when she opened her eyes, I had the feeling I was looking at someone I already knew, as if that little life had arrived with a mission, and part of that mission was to teach me to be a better man. At that moment, I promised her, even though she was too small to understand, that I would always be there. Always. No matter the stage, the problem, the world outside. She was my daughter, and that was enough to move whatever was necessary. Over the years, that promise wasn't just words. It became a habit, a routine, a way of life. I was there at every school presentation, sitting in the front row, even on days when I rushed out of work to get there on time. I was there when she brought home her first report card, proudly holding the grades carefully as if they were medals. I was there when she cried because of friends who had disappointed her, when she asked me for advice on how to deal with difficult teachers, when she wanted to give up on a dream, and I held her shoulders and said, "You were born to go further than you can imagine." I wasn't a perfect father. Nobody is. But I was present. I was the kind of father who knew his daughter's favorite ice cream flavor, her secret fear, the scent of the shampoo she used as a child, the music she listened to when she was sad, and the way she twirled a strand of her hair when she was nervous. I knew these little things because I paid attention. Because for me, being a father wasn't just about being there. It was about observing, feeling, and following every change, no matter how small. And she reciprocated that. We grew up forming such a strong bond of complicity that many people commented on it. She would call me to tell me about her achievements, to ask for my opinion, to share silly things from her day that somehow made sense to share with me. When she started dating, I was the first to know. When she ended a difficult relationship, I was the one who stayed up late with her, listening to every word, every tear. When she got her first job, we celebrated together with the same enthusiasm as someone who wins the lottery. And when she said she had found someone special, her eyes shone in a way I will never forget. Because of all this, because of this whole history built with care, affection, and respect, her request simply didn't make sense. It was as if someone took an entire book, full of beautiful chapters, and tore out the last page without any explanation. The daughter who asked me not to go to the new house was not the same daughter who grew up calling me her best friend. She was not the same daughter who said I was her safe haven. She was not the same daughter who, for years, made a point of including me in every important stage of her life. And that's the part that hurts. Life has a strange way of testing us. Sometimes it's an unexpected silence. Other times it's a word that hits you like a stone in the chest. But what hurts the most is when it comes from someone you love so much that you would be capable of weathering storms for them. I always considered myself a present, attentive father, ready to protect, and yet suddenly, I was on the outside, trying to understand what had changed. I tried to, find some specific moment, some conversation that might have been misinterpreted, some gesture of mine that might have hurt her without me realizing it. But the more I searched, the more certain I was that there was nothing that justified it. Our relationship was always built on trust. She knew she could tell me anything, and knowing that this time she hid something of this magnitude, of this weight, was like receiving a deep cut that I didn't see coming. That request, "Dad, don't come," wasn't just strange. It went against everything we'd experienced. It was like a rupture, a broken pact, a pain that echoed not only in her words, but in her tone of voice. It didn't make sense because it went against the essence of the relationship we'd built. If it were someone else, maybe I would accept it. If it were someone I had a distant relationship with, I would understand. But coming from her, It was impossible. And I know that many people might say that children grow up, that they create their own boundaries, that they have their own lives. I understand that. I respect that. But that wasn't the kind of boundary this was about. It was a boundary imposed with fear, with hesitation, with a weight that didn't match the history we both knew so well. She wasn't pushing me away for autonomy. She was pushing me away for something she couldn't or didn't want to explain. And that's where empathy with the father inevitably comes in. Anyone who has ever truly loved a child understands that being present doesn't mean invading, but accompanying. It doesn't mean controlling, but protecting. It doesn't mean demanding, but offering support. And I've always done that. Always. I've never been a father who judges, who criticizes, who points the finger. I've been the kind of father who listens, who hugs, who guides, who carries along. That's why, when she told me not to go, I felt not just worry, but a wound that pierced every good memory I'd built up over the years. Because when you're a devoted father, who's always been there, hearing that your daughter doesn't want your presence, right in the new house, right at the time that should be a celebration, is like someone taking all the memories you've cherished so much and saying, this doesn't matter anymore, but it matters. It matters a lot. And perhaps precisely because of that, because of everything we've been through together, because of everything we've built, this request sounded so wrong, so out of the ordinary, so far from the truth I knew. Something was happening to her, something big, something that didn't fit with the person who grew up by my side. And that's why, even before I made the decision to go to the new house, I already knew deep down, in the place where a father feels things before he understands them, that I needed to find out what was behind that sudden distance. Because when you know your child deeply, you know when he's truly smiling, and when he's smiling to hide what really matters. After that phone call, I simply couldn't be the same person for the rest of the day. Unease took hold of me as if it had settled inside my chest and refused to leave. It was a strange, vivid, almost physical sensation, as if someone were watching me, waiting to see what my next move would be. I tried to focus on other things, tried to occupy my mind with simple tasks, but everything seemed distant, blurred, unimportant. My head kept returning to the same words. Dad, please, don't come. To the new house. I repeated the phrase mentally, and each time it seemed worse. It was as if it had multiple hidden meanings, layers I still couldn't decipher. There was a request. There was an urgency. There was a fear. And the more I thought about it, the more my body reacted with signals I couldn't control. Cold hands, shortness of breath, an erratically racing heart. That night, I tried to go to bed early, thinking that perhaps rest would clear my mind. But as I lay down, I realized that the silence of the room only amplified my thoughts. The ceiling seemed to stare at me. Every shadow seemed to hide it. And the longer I lay there, the more that unsettling feeling grew, as if it were trying to warn me of something. I tossed and turned. I opened the window. I closed the window. I lay down with my arm under my head. I got up to get a drink of water. I went back to bed. And nothing, absolutely nothing, brought peace. That kind of restlessness that isn't just mental, it's instinctive. It's the kind of feeling a parent only gets when something is wrong with a child. It's an inner voice that won't be silenced, that insists, that begs for attention. And that night, that voice was screaming inside me. Every time I closed my eyes, I relived the scene of the phone call. Not just the words, but the silence before them, the silence after, the faltering breath, the tone of fear, the rush to hang up. Everything seemed to indicate that something much bigger was happening, something she didn't want me to find out. And that made me even more agitated, more alert, as if my body were prepared to react to anything. I tried to convince myself to respect her request. I told myself that she was an adult, that she had the right to make her own decisions, that maybe she was just stressed about the move, her husband, her job. But this internal dialogue didn't last even 5 seconds. I was too fragile in the face of the avalanche of premonitions that overwhelmed me. To obey or to go, respect or investigate, to be the father who waits or the father who acts. This was the conflict burning inside me. It was as if I were in the middle of a divided road, each side pulling at a different part of me. The rational side said I needed to trust her, give her space, wait for the moment she would open up. But the emotional side, the one that was born with her, the instinctive, protective, visceral side, screamed that there was danger, that something was hidden, that I couldn't walk away at that moment. The hours passed, and even without sleeping, I didn't feel tired. I felt anxious, a strange, almost anticipatory anxiety, like someone expecting something to happen at any moment. I even got out of bed twice, intending to leave, get in the car, and go to the new house right then and there. But both times, I sat on the edge of the bed, took a deep breath, and tried to restrain myself. I tried, but restraining a paternal instinct is like trying to hold water in your hands. It always finds a way to escape. At one point, around 3 in the morning, I sat in the living room in complete darkness and listened to the sounds of the house, the clock on the wall, the wind outside, the creaking of the old wooden floor. Everything seemed amplified, as if even the house was restless, reflecting my anguish, and it was there that I found myself murmuring softly, almost without realizing it. If I had known what awaited me, maybe I would have thought, twice. Those words escaped me like a premonition, a phrase uttered before everything happens, as if my soul had already seen the future before me, and it gave me such a strong shiver that it made me jump out of my chair. Something was about to happen. I could feel it. It wasn't my imagination. That was no exaggeration. It wasn't a drama. It was a warning. But a warning about what? I paced the room like a restless lion in a small space. Each passing minute seemed to heighten the sense of urgency. And however hard I tried to understand the origin of this feeling, it simply had no clear explanation. It was just a certainty, a terrible, silent certainty that my daughter wasn't okay, that she was trapped in some situation where she couldn't speak, that someone was watching, listening, controlling. And the more I thought about it, the faster my breathing became. My mind was trying to piece together a puzzle I didn't yet have, but even without the right pieces, I knew the final picture wouldn't be good. I tried to remember every detail she had told me about the new house a few weeks before. What was the neighborhood like? What were the neighbors like? Did she seem happy? Did she seem comfortable? Had she shown any hesitation that I hadn't noticed? Each memory came accompanied by questions that multiplied like echoes inside my head. And the more I tried to find logic, the more I realized there was no logic at all. What existed was fear. Her fear. My fear. A shared fear. Even though none of us had said it out loud. Around 4:30 in the morning, as the sky began to lighten slightly, I realized I had no choice. My mind was exhausted from trying to rationalize. My heart was too heavy to ignore. And my instinct, it had already made the decision for me hours before. I needed to go. I needed to see it. I needed to know what was happening, even if it meant discovering something I wasn't prepared to face. Because at that point, obeying meant turning my back on a request that made no sense. And I couldn't do that. I couldn't abandon my daughter at a time that seemed so heavy, so strange, so full of shadows. I stood up slowly, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. I ran my hand over my face, trying to shake off the weight of the sleepless night. And as I walked to the door, I had the same feeling you get when you're about to enter an unknown place. A chill down my spine, a hesitant step, an inner warning that life can change after the next move. And deep down, I knew. I knew that feeling wasn't there by chance. I knew something was about to emerge. I knew that somehow, this was the beginning of a turning point that I could never have imagined. If only I had known what truly awaited me in that house. If I had known what the neighbors were going to tell me. If I had known the weight of the truth that was about to fall upon me. Maybe, just maybe, I should have thought twice before going ahead. But I didn't know. And at that moment, all I had was a feeling that screamed inside me. Something is very wrong. When the first ray of sunlight began to touch the walls of my room, I was already standing, frozen in front of the door like someone who knows there's no turning back. The entire night had been a battleground between what I should do and what I needed to do. And in the end, as always happens when the heart is involved, necessity won. I ran my hand over my face, trying to shake off the accumulated fatigue, but the truth is I wasn't tired. I was tense, restless, throbbing inside as if my body were preparing to face something big. The pain that had started as a small twinge during the phone call was now almost physical, as if it had taken root in my chest. It was a pain that mixed worry and frustration, but also a courage I didn't even know I still had. I stared at the door once more. It wasn't just a door. It was the border between what I knew and what I feared to discover, between the old and the unknown, between the safety of my home and the strangeness of that absurd situation. And yet, I reached for the doorknob with the conviction of someone who had already made their decision before even understanding why. I needed to know. I needed to see it. I needed to understand the reason for such a painful request. Because when a daughter asks her father not to show up, The problem is never simple. It's never small. It's never casual. I closed the door behind me and felt the cool morning air envelop my face. The sky still held soft shades of blue and pink, as if the world were trying to pretend that everything was normal. But inside me, nothing was normal. There was urgency. There was fear. There was something pushing me forward, even as my feet hesitated with every step. The walk to the car seemed longer than usual. The keys trembled slightly in my hand, not from the cold, but from accumulated anxiety. I opened the door, got in, and for a few seconds I sat there, gripping the steering wheel with exaggerated force, as if that were the only thing capable of keeping me connected to the present moment. I took a deep breath. I started the engine. The sound of the car filled the silence of the street, and then I started driving. The route to my daughter's new neighborhood was relatively straightforward, but that morning, every kilometer seemed laden with mystery. As I drove along, my thoughts mingled with the scenery rushing past the windows, the empty streets, the closed shops, the first workers of the day walking with sleepy expressions. All of this created a sense of detachment, as if I were crossing not just the city, but some invisible border between before and after. At every traffic light, at every turn, I asked myself, what awaits me there? And why do I suddenly feel like I'm about to discover something that will change everything? The emotional pain came in waves, sometimes mild, sometimes so intense I had to clench my teeth to keep it from escaping in tears. Because it wasn't just about worry, it was also about disappointment, about the blow of knowing that the person you protected the most is pushing you away precisely when they need you most. But behind all that pain was courage, not the heroic courage that appears in movies, but the silent, almost stubborn courage that is born of love. The courage of a father who, even wounded, knows he needs to move forward, because giving up is not an option, because ignoring is not an alternative, because turning my back on a daughter is something that simply doesn't exist for me. As I approached the new neighborhood, I noticed something in the atmosphere seemed to be changing. The houses were newer, more modern, the streets wider, the facades cleaner, the kind of planned neighborhood that seemed to have been carefully painted, as if every detail had been measured and combined to convey order and beauty. But for me, that perfection only reinforced the discomfort. Places that are too perfect always hide deep imperfections. The neighborhood seemed too quiet, too empty. It was like a stage where something was about to happen. And, as I drove through the neatly aligned streets, I felt my shoulders tighten, as if each meter traveled increased the weight of what lay ahead. My daughter's house was on the last street in the housing complex, a narrower street lined with young trees that didn't yet provide enough shade to block out the morning light. As I turned the corner, a sudden shiver ran down my spine. There was no one on the street, no cars passing by, no children playing, nothing. Just the quiet houses, almost watching my arrival. And yet, there was movement. But not in the streets, inside the windows. Discreet faces, quick glances, curtains that moved. The feeling was clear. Someone already knew I was coming. Or worse, someone was waiting to see what would happen when I arrived. I parked the car slowly, without taking my eyes off the house. It was beautiful. I couldn't deny that. White facade, wooden details, freshly trimmed garden. The perfect house my daughter had dreamed of. The perfect house that, for some inexplicable reason, I couldn't get close to. The tension in my body grew as if each muscle were preparing for a revelation, for a shock, for a truth I didn't want to face but needed to confront. The feeling of unease that had begun in the early morning was now almost unbearable, like a second heart pounding inside my chest. I grabbed my keys, took a deep breath, and opened the car door. The air in the neighborhood felt colder, denser, heavier. Then I started walking toward the house, each step slow, calculated, laden with meaning. And it was there, in the middle of that silent street, observing that seemingly perfect house, that the feeling took shape within me. If I had known what awaited me, maybe I would have thought twice before coming, but I was already there. I had made my decision. I would go all the way, even if it meant discovering something capable of forever changing the way I saw my daughter and myself. When I got out of the car, I had the distinct feeling that I wasn't just entering a new neighborhood, but a strange kind of stage, where I was the only character who hadn't yet received the script. The smooth cement floors, the well-maintained sidewalks, the impeccably manicured gardens, everything there exuded organization, tranquility, and security. But beneath this perfect surface, there was something I couldn't ignore, an unease, a discomfort, a silent presence that accompanied me with every step. I closed the car door slowly, and the sound echoed louder than it should have on that quiet street. It was enough to make some curtains move in a matter of seconds. First, fleetingly, then more boldly. A subtle movement here, another there. Faces appeared and disappeared quickly, as if no one wanted to be caught staring too much, but also couldn't help but observe me. I took my first steps toward my daughter's house, and as I got closer, the feeling of being judged only intensified. From a balcony to the left, a woman holding a mug stopped drinking for a few seconds. She looked me up and down, as if trying to confirm if I was who she thought I was. Across the street, a man who seemed to be watering plants turned off the hose, let the water run onto the ground, and simply stared at me with a look that mixed curiosity and pity. Yes, pity. It was as if he knew something I didn't yet know, and that made my stomach churn. I tried to ignore it. I pretended not to see. I kept walking. My steps felt heavier, as if the air were denser, thicker, harder to get through. The silence of the neighborhood, which on any other day might be a sign of peace, was suffocating at that hour. There were no children playing, no dogs barking, no sound of televisions coming from the houses, only the sound of the wind passing through the trees and the dry sound of my shoes hitting the ground. The further I walked, the more I felt eyes on my back. They weren't neutral stares. They were stares that carried history, stares that carried information, stares that carried a kind of judgment that I didn't know where it came from, but that fell upon me as if I were guilty of something, even without knowing what. That's when I heard the first whisper. I didn't hear it clearly, but I saw it. A couple stood in front of a garage, near a car, conversing quietly. When they saw me, the words simply died on their lips. She touched his arm as if to say, "Look," and he turned his face toward me. They exchanged a quick glance, the kind of look that doesn't need words to say, "It's him." They immediately pretended to be nonchalant, but it was too late. I had already noticed. The feeling of being judged began to merge with another feeling, that I was the subject of the discussion, not just a stranger who suddenly appeared. No, I was someone they had already heard of, and that made my daughter's phrase echo in my mind even more strongly. "Dad, please, don't come to the new house." Why didn't she want me to come? And worse, why did I have the distinct impression that those people knew the answer, and I didn't? I continued walking, now with my senses even more alert. Every averted glance, every step that stopped as I passed, every curtain that closed a second after I raised my head. It was like walking inside a story already told, but from which I had been purposefully excluded. I felt a lump forming in my throat. Not from shame, but from injustice. The kind of injustice you feel when you realize you've been put in a role you didn't choose, as if somehow I had already been judged before even saying a word. When I stopped for a moment in the middle of the sidewalk, I took a deep breath and looked around. That's when I noticed a detail that had previously gone unnoticed. Some of the neighbors weren't just watching me, they were watching me with a mixture of curiosity and caution. It wasn't open hostility, but it wasn't welcoming either. It was as if they were trying to gauge how far they could get involved. Up until that moment, I could still believe it was all in my head. That anxiety, lack of sleep, fear, and love for my daughter were making me paranoid. But then something happened that confirmed it wasn't my imagination. A woman, perhaps in her early 60s, was on the sidewalk sweeping some leaves in front of her house. She stopped for a second, rested her hands on the broom handle, looked me in the eye, and asked with a strange gentleness, full of care and curiosity at the same time, "Are you the father of—" And he said my daughter's name. For a second, I wanted to answer proudly, as I always did. Yes, I am her father. But something in her tone, in the way her eyes seemed to weigh her words, made me take a breath before answering. "Yes, I am," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Do you know her?" She didn't answer immediately. She lowered her gaze, slightly, as if considering whether or not to say something, and then looked back at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. There was a hint of sadness, a hint of disapproval, and a hint of compassion. "I recognize you by sight," she finally said, "but here, everyone's heard of you. From you." That word fell like a weight in the middle of the sentence. Not hers, not the couple's, not the new residents. Yours. As if my story were circulating through those houses, without me being there to tell it. My heart ached. "You heard? What do you mean?" I asked, trying to stay calm, even though I felt a pang in the pit of my stomach. She took a deep breath, gripped the broom handle a little tighter, and for a moment seemed to regret what she had said. Her eyes darted toward my daughter's house, as if she feared someone might be watching through the window. Then, in a lower tone, almost a whisper, she said, "I don't think I'm the one who should say certain things, but excuse me, it's just the way she spoke about you." She paused again, bit her lip, and finished. "It doesn't match the way you seem to be." At that moment, I felt as if the ground had shifted slightly, as if a crack had begun to open between the image I had of our relationship and the image they were painting of me there in that place. She? Speaking of myself. How? What exactly had my daughter said to those people? I looked at her house right there in front, beautiful, silent, still, and, suddenly, it no longer seemed like just a house. It seemed like a secret kept by many hands, a secret that the neighbors knew in detail, and that I, the father, knew absolutely nothing about. The glances around me, which had previously seemed merely curious, now turned into evidence. Evidence that my daughter had shared some story. Evidence that I was, there, the other side of that story. Evidence that most likely I had already been transformed into the villain even before crossing that gate. And that's a feeling that eats you up inside. Because while I carried memories of affection, protection, presence, and love, another narrative was unfolding behind the brightly painted walls of that neighborhood. A narrative in which I was something else. Another person, another father, a character I didn't recognize. But that apparently everyone there knew very well. My throat went dry. My heart raced. I felt an almost desperate need to find out what this story was all about. What version of my life was being told without my knowledge? What image of our relationship was being presented to those neighbors who now looked at me as if I were part of a drama they were watching from a distance, from their windows? And deep down, the question that began to echo inside me, louder than any other, was, why do they know something about me that I don't know about myself? Why did those people, who were supposed to be just new neighbors, seem to carry a piece of the truth that had been denied to me? As I approached my daughter's front door, with all those stares weighing on my shoulders, an unsettling certainty settled in my chest. That wasn't just a visit. It was an entry into territory where everyone already knew what was happening, except me. As I got closer to my daughter's house, still feeling the neighbors' stares burning into my back, I noticed that a window to the right, in the house next door, had its curtains slightly open. It wasn't a quick movement, the kind where someone tries to hide. It was a calculated movement, careful, as if someone had been watching since the moment I turned the corner, just waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. For a second, I tried to ignore it, but instinct wouldn't let me. Something about that silent presence drew my attention in an almost magnetic way, and it wasn't long before the curtain opened a little more, enough for me to see the outline of a woman's face, aged by time, but with eyes so attentive they seemed to pierce the distance like blades. She didn't look away when she realized I had seen her. On the contrary, she kept her gaze fixed, studying every detail of my face, as if trying to confirm something, or as if trying to reconcile the person she saw there, in person, with some story she had heard before. I took a deep breath and kept walking. I was just a few steps from the door when I heard a dry sound behind me, the click of a lock being unlocked. I turned my head slowly, and, to my surprise, the door to the house next door opened before I could even react. The woman at the window was there, now framed by the shadow of the door itself. She was older, perhaps close to 70, with her hair tied in a simple bun and a serious, almost stern expression. But there was something in her eyes, a mixture of curiosity, pity, and alertness, that made my heart race a little faster. She didn't wait for me to say anything. She didn't beat around the bush. She simply leaned forward slightly, and in a firm voice, asked, "You're her father, aren't you?" The sentence hung in the air like a weight, an enormous weight, a weight laden with meaning. She didn't say my daughter's name, but I knew exactly who she was talking about. It wasn't a casual question. It was a confirmatory question. A question from someone who already knew the answer before even hearing it. For a moment, I was paralyzed, not by the question itself, but by the way it was phrased. There was an invisible pause between each word, as if she were measuring its syllables with extreme care. It was almost as if she were treading on dangerous ground, and any misstep could trigger something bigger. I forced a polite smile, even though my breathing was uneven. "Yes, I am," I replied. "Do you know her?" She didn't answer immediately. She blinked slowly, as if organizing her thoughts, and then she sighed slightly, resting her hand on the door frame. Her expression changed subtly, from observant to worried, then to compassionate, and that only increased the tightness I felt in my chest. To know, she repeated the word, as if savoring its meaning. To know, I wouldn't exactly say. She paused again, this time longer. But I've heard quite a bit about her. About the two of you, actually. That pause made the air around me feel heavier. The words, "I've heard enough," echoed inside me like a warning that something was about to come to light. Really? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. And what exactly? Did you hear? The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she were trying to anticipate my reaction before I even spoke. She moistened her lips, took a deep breath, and said, "I don't know if I should say this." Pause. "But I think," another, even longer pause, "that you deserve to know." The tension in my throat became so strong that swallowing was difficult. My shoulders were stiff, and the feeling that something very serious lay behind that conversation only intensified. She glanced, briefly at my daughter's house, then at me, then back at the house, as if she were afraid of being seen, as if someone might be watching, or listening. "Ever since she moved here," she began, but stopped abruptly. She bit her lower lip. "Well, she said a few things that left the people here kind of—" She searched for the word, but couldn't find it. "Kind of confused." Another pause. A long one. Intentional. I took an involuntary step toward her, not out of aggression, but out of desperation. Out of necessity. Out of a desire to extract the truth that seemed trapped inside that woman. "What did she say?" I asked, my voice low but firm. She looked into my eyes, deeply, and in that instant, something in her gaze sent a chill down my spine. It was the kind of look that says more than words could. A look that has seen things, that has heard things, that has perceived things. And then, for the first time, she truly hesitated. Her lips trembled slightly. She ran her hand along her arm, as if she were cold, but it was clear. It wasn't cold. It was apprehension. "The way she spoke about you," she began, but her voice faltered. "It doesn't match the way you seem to be." The sentence hung in the air, as if it were incomplete, as if it concealed a much greater truth. I felt my stomach sink. I felt a warm wave rise in my chest. I felt the sensation of injustice grow like an internal fire. She was telling me, in other words, that my daughter had spoken ill of me, very badly, and the whole neighborhood had heard. The whole neighborhood had formed an opinion. The whole neighborhood had constructed an image of me, without ever having seen me before. But before I could ask anything, the woman raised a finger as if asking for silence. Her eyes moved discreetly to the window of my daughter's house, then to the street. It was such a small, quick gesture, yet so meaningful that it gave me goosebumps. She took a step closer and in an almost inaudible whisper added, "Go in. There carefully, okay? There's something that doesn't smell right to me." And then, before I could react, before I could ask anything else, before I could try to extract the whole truth, she simply stepped back, closed the door slowly, and disappeared behind it, leaving only the echo of that phrase hanging in the air like a prophecy. "Go in there carefully." I stood motionless on the sidewalk, trying to grasp the weight of those words. The light breeze seemed to mock my silence. The curtains of nearby houses fluttered discreetly, as if observing my reaction. And at that moment, I realized something terrible. That neighbor wasn't just curious. She was afraid. Fear of what I knew. Fear of what she had heard. Fear of what was happening in that house. Fear for me. And that simple realization made my heart beat slower, heavier, more constrained. Because if even a neighbor who barely knew me was worried, what exactly was I about to discover inside? I stood there for a few seconds on the sidewalk, in front of my neighbor's closed door, trying to process what I had just heard, and especially what she hadn't had the courage to say. The wind seemed colder, the street quieter, my daughter's house more distant, even though it was right there. Her words echoed in my mind like a repeated warning. Go in there carefully. Be careful about what? With whom? Given the situation? With the truth? I took a few steps back, as if I needed to see everything from a wider angle. My daughter's house was in front of me. The neighbor's house was next door. The windows were half closed. And again, the unsettling feeling that I was the only one there who still didn't have access to what was actually happening. I was about to climb the 2 steps leading to my daughter's door when I heard a voice behind me. You're her father, right? I turned slowly. Across the street, a middle-aged man, perhaps in his 50s, stood near his front gate. He wore a simple shirt and work trousers and held a folded newspaper in his hand, as if he were simply enjoying the start of the morning. But the way he looked at me said otherwise. He didn't seem surprised by my presence. He seemed attentive, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "Yes, I am," I replied, no longer able to hide my tension. "I think everyone here already knows that, right?" He gave a short, humorless smile. "Things move quickly here." He paused, glanced around as if checking if anyone was watching, and then added, "Especially when it comes to that house." He subtly pointed with his chin toward my daughter's home. That bothered me even more. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Is there a problem?" He took a deep breath, ran a hand over the back of his neck, and for a moment seemed conflicted, just like the neighbor a few minutes before. It was as if he were internally debating whether or not he should open his mouth, until finally, he tilted his head slightly and crossed the street, approaching me. When he got closer, he spoke in a lower tone. "Look, I don't like to meddle in other people's lives." Pause. "But, judging by the way you arrived here, I think you've already noticed that something's wrong, haven't you?" I didn't need to answer. My silence was answer enough. He continued, "Ever since your daughter and her husband moved in, this part of the street hasn't had a normal day. There's strange activity, shouting, people coming and going at all hours." He shook his head. "And honestly, there are things you see and pretend you didn't see." The word shouting, it hit me like a punch in the stomach. "What do you mean?" My voice came out firmer than I expected. "They fight?" He looked at my daughter's window as if just mentioning it could start an argument. "They fight? A lot." He paused again. "Especially in the early morning. You can hear it from here, sometimes from the corner. She's crying, he's talking loudly, shouting, slamming doors. Once, you could even hear something fall to the floor. You're not sure whether to call someone, intervene, or pretend it's just another couple arguing. But," he sighed, "it doesn't sound like a normal argument." My heart started beating erratically. My daughter, crying. My daughter, screaming. My daughter, constantly fighting. And me, at home, completely unaware. "And nobody did anything?" I asked, trying to contain the anger that was rising within me. "You know how it is, right?" he replied, with a tired look. "These days, anything we do is interpreted as an invasion. I've had neighbors try to get closer, offer help, ask if everything was all right. She said it was just stress, that her husband was going through difficulties, that things were under control." He made air quotes with his fingers. "But the truth is, nobody here believes that everything is all right." He paused for a long time, observing me, as if he wanted to gauge the impact of that information on me. I felt my hands sweating. For a moment, the world seemed to spin a little faster. "And that's not all," he continued. "There's also that guy." "What guy?" I asked, confused. He looked back at the street, making sure no one else was coming close, and then replied, "A man who comes here frequently. He's not a relative. He's not an old friend. At least, he never introduces himself that way. But he comes almost every week, sometimes 2, 3 times, always with a briefcase in his hand, sometimes with envelopes. They always talk in the living room, or in the garage, never at the gate. And almost always, after he leaves, there's a fight." The image began to form in my mind. A strange man, briefcase in hand, repeatedly entering my daughter's house. Hidden conversations, documents, money, debts, threats, and after each visit, discussion. A heavy knot formed at the base of my throat. "Do you know who he is?" I asked. "Not exactly," he replied, "but the other day, I heard him talking loudly as I was leaving. He said something like, 'If you don't resolve this, it's going to get worse for everyone.'" The neighbor looked at me seriously. "That's not normal visitor talk. That's not friendly talk. That's a demand for payment. A problem." My hands began to tremble slightly. My whole body seemed to react, as if it were on high alert. My daughter, my son-in-law, visits from a man with a briefcase, fights, veiled threats, and me, on the outside of all this. To make matters worse, the neighbor added, "And there was more." He lowered his voice even more. "Some nights, very late, cars appear, stop quickly, people get out, go in, stay a few minutes, and leave, always in a hurry, always looking around. It's not family coming to visit. It's not a friend for dinner. It's another kind of visit." That description ignited a different kind of fear within me. It wasn't just the fear that my daughter was in a bad relationship. It was the fear that she was involved in, or being dragged into, something far more serious. "You need to understand," he said with a harsh sincerity, "that for us on the outside, It's very clear that something is going on in that house. And it's not a small thing. Your daughter," he hesitated, as if choosing carefully, "doesn't seem like the same person when she's with him. She's tense, scared. She looks around all the time. When someone asks if she's okay, she answers too quickly, as if she'd rehearsed the phrase beforehand." I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to control the images that came to mind. My daughter, walking through the neighborhood scared, smiling reluctantly, saying, "Everything's fine," with a voice that seemed more intent on convincing herself than others. And me, once again, at home, believing that her life was entering a new phase of happiness. That's when the neighbor looked me straight in the eyes and asked the question that cut through everything like a blade. "She didn't tell you any of this, did she?" The way he asked wasn't accusatory. It was sad, as if he knew the answer before even hearing it, as if, in his mind, I was just another victim of a poorly told story. My voice cracked as I tried to answer. "No," I admitted with difficulty. "She didn't say anything." He nodded slowly, as if confirming a long-held suspicion. "So," he said, "it's because there's something there that she doesn't want you to know, or that someone won't let her tell you." The words, "don't let," echoed inside me like thunder. At this point, the audience listening to this story may be thinking exactly what I was beginning to think, that my daughter wasn't just hiding something by choice. She could be pressed, manipulated, controlled, and perhaps I was trying to distance myself to protect myself from something, or to obey someone's wishes. The pieces began to move within my mind, even without me having the complete picture. The fights, the constant visits, the man with the briefcase, the veiled threats, the cars that came and went at strange hours, the abrupt change. In her behavior, the desperate plea for me not to show up at the new house, all of this formed a web in which clearly my daughter was trapped. Me too, even without knowing it, even from a distance. As the neighbor walked away, slowly returning to his gate, a feeling overwhelmed me with such force that I could barely breathe. My daughter was hiding something serious, very serious. And at that moment, more than ever, I was certain of one thing. I couldn't leave. I couldn't pretend I didn't know anything. I could no longer simply be a spectator of the story they were telling for me. I needed to get into that house. I needed to look into my daughter's eyes. I needed to hear, from her own mouth, the truth that everyone else seemed to already know, except me. I was still trying to process everything the neighbor had said when I heard the door to the house next door open again. The same older neighbor, the one who had watched me through the window and given me the first warning, appeared again, now with an even more tense face than before. She glanced quickly to the sides, as if afraid of being seen talking to me, and walked to the low fence that separated her yard from the sidewalk. Her steps were slow, heavy, as if carrying more than her age allowed. When she got close, she placed her thin hands on the wood, took a deep breath, and called to me. "Young man." Her voice came out low and trembling. "Wait a moment." I approached slowly, feeling my heart race, uncontrollably. Her expression had changed completely, and not for the better. It was a serious expression, full of hesitation, regret, and fear. Fear of what she was about to say. Fear, perhaps, of the consequences of her words. She began, but stopped. She ran her hand over her chest, as if trying to find courage. "I need to tell you something. I don't know if I should, but I think it's worse if you go in there without knowing anything." She glanced again at my daughter's house. That quick glance, almost a reflex, said it all. She feared someone might be listening, or watching, or that my daughter might suddenly come out and find us talking. "What happened?" I asked, my voice coming out lower than I intended. "Did she say something?" The neighbor's gaze grew heavy, and she nodded. Her breathing slowed, as if she were choosing each word with extreme care. "Yes, he did." Long pause. "He said things that left the people here quite worried." "What kind of things?" I asked, swallowing hard. She hesitated. She looked at the floor. She looked at me again. She touched her own arm as if trying to console herself. And finally, with great difficulty, she said, "She told the people in the neighborhood that you were a controlling man." The word hit me like an unexpected thunderclap. Controller. It's as if someone had placed a permanent stamp on my forehead. "Controller?" I repeated, almost voicelessly. The neighbor nodded sadly. "She said that you always interfered. Too much in her life. That you pressured her. That you made her feel suffocated." She bit her lip, hesitated, and added, "She also said that you had a difficult temperament." My chest tightened, as if something inside it had been forcibly ripped out. Difficult temperament? I asked, incredulous. Me? She took another deep breath, as if it hurt her too. She used the word aggressive, he said finally. She said that you got nervous easily, that you made her feel belittled, that you never respected certain decisions in her life. That phrase landed like a sentence. I felt a warmth rising up my face. Then, intense cold. Then, nothing. A huge void opened up inside me, as if all the fond memories I had of our history had been thrown against a wall and shattered into pieces so small they could no longer be put back together. I tried to speak, but my voice failed me. I took a deep breath, trying to regain control. I've never been like this. I've never treated her this way. The neighbor nodded slowly. I know, he said sincerely. At least, it doesn't seem like it. She looked straight into my eyes, searching for a truth that I knew was there. When I saw you on the street, she continued, I imagined someone else. When she arrived here telling these stories, everyone thought she was a kind of man, tougher, more explosive, more… She searched for the word, and finally found it, toxic. That last word reopened a wound I didn't know could exist. Toxic. Was that what my daughter had said about me? Was that how she explained to the neighbors why I didn't show up? Was that the narrative she constructed to justify my sudden distancing? I felt my legs threatening to give way. I took several deep breaths, but it felt like I couldn't breathe. The injustice of those words was so great that it hurt like a deep cut. Not physical, but emotional. A cut that, for a moment, made me doubt everything. Myself, my role as a father, every conversation, every hug, every act of care I've ever given her throughout her entire life. I never did any of that, I repeated, as if trying to remind the world that there was truth there. Never. I've always been on her side. The neighbor shook her head slowly. I believe you, she said, her eyes welling up with tears. Believe me. It's clear in the way you talk about her. It's clear in the way you tremble just thinking that she might be in danger. It's clear there's love there. Another break. Another glance. To the sides. Another hesitation filled with worry. But, she continued, something's going on in that house. And I don't know why she made up these things, but she swallowed hard. When someone talks about a father like that, with so much fear in their voice, the whole neighborhood believes them, right? She lowered her head, as if she were ashamed to admit it. And that's why, he continued, we thought it might be best if you didn't show up here. At least, until she was more at ease. That revelation hit hard. The entire neighborhood believed in her. The entire neighborhood had an image of me. The whole neighborhood judged me for a story I never told. And all this because my own daughter said that I was controlling, aggressive, toxic. My throat burned, not with anger, but with hurt, with injustice, with utter disbelief. It was as if the person I loved most in the world had thrown a stone directly into my chest. I don't understand, I murmured. Why would she do that? What did I do? Where did I go wrong? The neighbor took a step back, looking again at my daughter's house. That's what you need to find out, she replied. Because when someone speaks so badly of a person they loved so much, it's because there's something there that we're not seeing. Something ugly, something hidden, something that, she hesitated, doesn't exactly seem to have come from her. You know? That last sentence resonated within me like a warning. It doesn't seem to have come from her. She wasn't just implying that my daughter lied. She was implying that perhaps my daughter had been led to say that by someone, for a reason, for some bigger and darker reason than I imagined. The neighbor took another step back. Her face was completely serious now. I'm sorry if this hurts you, she said with painful sincerity. But if I didn't tell you, I would feel guilty afterward. Just be careful, because there's truth in there that won't be easy to hear. And there's a lie in there that hurts even more. She then slowly went back inside the house, as if fleeing from a silent danger, and I stood there in the street, with the sun illuminating my skin. But inside, I was immersed in a darkness that I didn't know how to face. It's not just the rumor that hurts. It's not just the lie. It's not just slander. What hurts? It's knowing that it came from the person you protected most your whole life. I stood there for a few minutes in front of my daughter's house trying to catch my breath, which seemed to have abandoned me. The neighbor's revelation echoed in my mind like a hammer repeatedly striking the same spot. Controlling, aggressive, toxic, words I never thought I'd hear associated with my name. even less so coming from the person I loved most in the world. But at that moment, more than pain, what I felt was urgency, an urgency that burned, that squeezed, that pushed my body forward even as my soul was trying to recover from the recent blows. I needed answers. I needed to understand what was happening. I needed to look into her eyes and hear the truth, however harsh it might be. I climbed the 2 steps to the entrance. Each step seemed heavier than the last, as if the stairs represented not just the front door of a house, but the entrance to a completely new and dangerous truth. I stopped in front of the door. I took a deep breath, and I knocked. It wasn't an aggressive touch. It wasn't a hesitant touch. It was a firm, decisive touch, laden with everything that was in my heart: love, pain, confusion, worry, and an almost desperate need to understand. I waited a few seconds. Silence. I hit it again. This time, a little harder. That's when I heard a noise from the other side. Quick, hurried footsteps. A faint squeak of something being dragged. A muffled whisper. Then, the clear sound of the latch being unlocked. The door opened slowly. And then my daughter appeared. The image of her at that moment will never leave my memory. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, like someone seeing a ghost or something they deeply feared. Her hair was haphazardly tied back. She wore a loose blouse, and her breathing was irregular, as if she had been running. But what struck me most was her expression. Panic. Pure, simple, and devastating panic. "Dad," she whispered, her voice almost breaking. "What are you doing here? What am I doing here?" The question she asked should have been mine, but I didn't say that. I simply looked at her, and in that look I saw everything I didn't want to see. Fear of me, or fear of something that surrounded her. A fear that didn't match who she was, or who I was. Before I could answer, I heard another sound inside the house. Heavy, hurried footsteps, as if someone had been caught off guard. And then he appeared. The son-in-law. He appeared behind her so quickly it seemed he was at the door before even appearing in the hallway. His body filled the space behind her like a shadow, like a barrier. His eyes were wide, but not with surprise, more with irritation, with tension, with control. He positioned himself slightly ahead, as if protecting her from me. "What do you want here?" he asked, his voice firm and cold. My daughter gave a small start, as if she hadn't expected him to speak that way, and that only reinforced what the neighbors had told me. The fights, the fears, the changes in behavior, the way he always seemed to be nearby, watching, controlling. I looked at the two of them, but my attention returned to her, and the question that had been burning inside me finally came out. "I want to know." My voice trembled, but I let it tremble. "Why are you saying these things about me?" The silence that fell between us was so heavy it seemed to have a shape. My daughter opened her mouth but said nothing. Her eyes shone for a second, as if she were about to cry, or confess, or break down. But before she could make a sound, her son-in-law placed his hand on her shoulder, subtly, but firmly. A seemingly innocent gesture, but one that carried authority, pressure, control. I felt my stomach churn as I realized how much that simple movement conveyed. "This isn't something to discuss at my doorstep," he said, even more curtly than before. "You should have respected her request not to come." "I'm not talking to you," I replied, turning my face back to my daughter. "I'm talking to her. I want to hear it from her. I want to know why you told the neighbors that. I'm controlling, that I'm aggressive, that I'm toxic. I want to know why. Why, daughter? Why?" She took 2 steps back involuntarily, as if the question had physical weight, as if each word had pushed her. Her hands trembled. Her lips tried to form sentences, but none came out. The son-in-law intervened again, moving closer, now standing completely between us. "You shouldn't be here," he repeated, this time in a lower voice but full of threat. "She doesn't want to talk to you." "Who said that?" I asked, without taking my eyes off my daughter. "Was it her, or was it you?" The question landed like a bolt of lightning in the room. My daughter shuddered. My son-in-law clenched his jaw, and at that exact moment I had the confirmation I needed, not from their words, but from their reaction. She opened her mouth again. Finally, she seemed to gather the courage to speak, but her son-in-law squeezed her shoulder again, this time hard enough to make her take a deep breath, as if she had received a command, and she backed away. He recoiled from my gaze. He recoiled from my question. He recoiled from me. "Dad," she said finally, I think you should leave." These words didn't come from hatred. They didn't come from anger. They came from fear. Pure fear. and that hurt even more. All I want, I continued, feeling my voice falter, is to know the truth. Why did you say that about me? Why did you make up those things? Why did you let the whole neighborhood believe I'm someone I'm not? She closed her eyes tightly. A silent tear trickled down the corner of her left eye, and her hand reached for her husband's, not out of love, but out of desperation, as if she were holding on to something she couldn't let go of. Because, she began, but her voice broke. Because I couldn't. Couldn't you what? I asked, taking a step forward, but without crossing the invisible line that seemed to separate my world from hers. Couldn't you tell me? Couldn't you ask for help? Couldn't you be honest with me? Why? That's when my son-in-law stepped forward and closed the door a little more, blocking half of my field of vision. That's enough, he said firmly. You heard me. She wants you to leave. I took a deep breath. The air felt sharp. I'm not leaving, I replied, keeping my voice calm but firm. Not until I hear the truth from her own mouth. Not until I understand what made her say all that. She knows me. She knows who I am. This didn't come from her. It couldn't have come from, her. And that's when my daughter, between sobs, whispered the words that broke me inside. Dad, I'm sorry. Nothing more. No explanation. No justification. Just a plea for forgiveness, coming from the most confused and painful place I've ever seen her in. I reached out my hand, as if I could grasp it, as if I could pull her back to the reality we knew, but the son-in-law pulled the door back towards him, leaving only a crack through which I could still see her face. Scared, confused, trapped in something I didn't yet understand. And he finished, before slamming the door shut. Go away. Now. The door slammed shut with a bang that reverberated inside me like a gunshot. And there, on the threshold of the house that should have been my daughter's home, but felt more like a silent cage, I felt a pain so deep, so unfair, so cutting, that for a moment my knees threatened to give way. But along with the pain, an even stronger certainty emerged. The truth was inside, and I wouldn't leave that neighborhood without finding her. When the door slammed shut in front of me, the sound echoed inside me longer than it should have. It wasn't just a door slamming. It was a boundary being imposed. It was a definitive, you stay outside. I stood there, on the sidewalk, hearing only the muffled sound of hurried footsteps inside, as if they were rushing to erase any trace of that scene. I took a deep breath, trying to regain my balance. The humiliation of the moment, the pain of my daughter's frightened gaze, my son-in-law's coldness, the lies circulating about me in the neighborhood, it all piled up like an unbearable weight on my shoulders. But instead of making me leave, it only ignited something even stronger within me. If I had any doubts before, they were gone now. There was something big inside. There was a hidden truth inside. Inside, someone was manipulating the story, and everything pointed to him. Eugenio. I began to slowly descend the short flight of stairs, more to organize my thoughts than to actually leave. I looked around. The street remained strangely silent, but I knew that, behind the curtains, someone was still watching. It didn't take long for me to be sure of it. The same older neighbor from before appeared again, this time not through the door but from the side of the house, as if she had gone around just to talk to me without drawing too much attention. She made a discreet gesture with her hand, calling me over to the small side gate. Come here. For a moment, my son, she said in a low, urgent tone. Don't go away yet. I approached. My heart was still racing. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and determination, as if she were holding in her hand something she had kept for too long. I heard everything, she confessed. The way he spoke to you, the way she trembled. This has been going on for a while now. What do you mean by a while ago? I asked, feeling my blood boil. She took a deep breath and looked at her daughters. House again, as if each time she did so, she needed to overcome an inner fear. Do you remember that man with the briefcase that the other neighbor mentioned? She asked. Absent. That's right, she continued. What he doesn't know is that I've already heard more than I should have, unintentionally. My kitchen is right next to their living room wall. If I turn off the TV and stay quiet, I can hear almost everything. There was a pause, a long pause, a pause from someone who knows that, after what they are about to say, nothing will ever be the same again. One day, she began, I overheard your son-in-law talking to this man. His voice was raised, angry. He was saying that, the way things were, it wasn't possible to access anything. And the man with the briefcase replied that, as long as you were in the way, there was no way to advance the inheritance, no way to change documents, no way to put everything in the right name. The word heritage hung in the air. Inheritance? I asked, somewhat disbelievingly. What are you talking about? She gripped the bars tightly, her slender fingers turning almost white. He spoke about you, she said firmly. He mentioned your name. He said you were a problem, that as long as your daughter remained close to you, there would be no way to convince you to pass on the house, to advance assets, to make life easier for the new couple. And that's when I clearly heard him saying, she needs to believe that her father is no good. She needs to distance herself. She needs to stop trusting him. Only then can we get him to sign what we need. It was like being stabbed in slow motion. I felt the ground disappear beneath me for a second. My breath caught in my throat. My heart began to pound erratically, as if trying to keep up with the impact of those words. My son-in-law, saying that I was a problem, saying that my daughter needed to stop trusting me, saying that she needed to believe that I was no good, all because of inheritance. At that moment, everything began to make sense in a way that was far too cruel. The visits of the man with the briefcase, the arguments that followed after he left, the fear in my daughter's eyes, the lies planted in the neighborhood, the desperate plea for me not to go to the new house. It wasn't just emotional distance. It wasn't just pride. It wasn't just a family disagreement. It was a strategy. It was manipulation. It was money. They talked about the house where you live, the neighbor continued. They said it already belonged to them by moral right, that you didn't need so much space, that people your age should make things easier. And your son-in-law, she paused, breathing heavily. He said, I'm going to make her see who he really is. I'm going to open her eyes. She'll be ashamed to have had a father like that. She stopped. Her eyes welled up with tears. But, from what I see of you, he finished, it doesn't match. It doesn't fit. It's as if he took a good story and rewrote the villain. I leaned my hand against the wall beside me because my legs finally began to give way. The idea that my son-in-law, the man I embraced at the wedding, with whom I toasted, whom I wished would take care of my daughter, was actually building a monstrous image of me in her mind, was something I wasn't prepared to process. But the worst was yet to come. The neighbor swallowed hard and continued. There was one day, she said, her voice even lower, when he said something that kept me awake at night. He said, if she doesn't distance herself from the old man, she'll never sign anything. And if he dies first, everything will be blocked. So she'd better stop thinking he's a saint and understand that he's always been an emotional abuser. She closed her eyes as she repeated those words. I felt as if someone had squeezed my heart with their hand. Emotional abuser, controller, toxic. That was the label he was planting on everyone, including my own daughter. But my daughter knows who I am, I murmured, my voice choked with emotion. She knows the kind of father she had. She knows what I did for her. She knows what I would never do. How could she believe that? My neighbor looked at me with deep sadness. He didn't start by speaking ill of you, she explained. He started by speaking ill of money, of the difficult life, of the lack of support. He said that you never helped enough, that you could do more. He planted resentment in small conversations between the lines, little by little, slowly, until she began to see you not for who you are, but for what he told her. Another pause, another open wound. And, when she hesitated, the neighbor continued, he used fear. He said that if you didn't transfer the house to her name, you two would end up fighting, that you could leave her out of the will, that you could change all the names, that you could remarry and transfer everything to someone else. He fed her insecurity. He fed her anxiety. He fed a ghost that didn't exist. And in the end, she believed him. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to hold back the tears. It wasn't just about inheritance. It was about trust. It was about someone taking the most sensitive link between a father and daughter, the fear of losing each other, and turning it into a weapon. When I opened my eyes, my neighbor was still watching me. There was one night, she said, as if finally lifting a gigantic weight from her chest, when she broke down. I heard her crying, saying she didn't want it to be like this, that you were a good father, that she was afraid she would regret it. And he replied. She paused for a long, dramatic moment, as if even repeating the words was difficult. Regret doesn't pay the bills. He's already lived his life. Now it's our turn. If you don't walk away, you'll lose everything. I felt a shiver run from my feet to my head. There lay the core of the truth. He wasn't just after my inheritance. He was willing to destroy the image my daughter had of me to achieve that. Money, home, security, total control. She's not bad, you know, the neighbor said in a softer tone. You can tell she's torn inside. Some days she leaves the house with her eyes swollen from crying. Some days she walks past here so hunched over, it's like she's carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. But she took a deep breath. She's scared. Scared of him. Scared of losing what he promised. Scared of losing her footing. I remained silent for a few seconds, trying to organize that whole avalanche. My son-in-law, the money, the inheritance, slow, calculated manipulation. He needed me to be the villain. He needed me to be the problem. He needed my daughter to want distance from me, because a present, lucid, and loved father, he doesn't sign any papers. And there, in the middle of that seemingly quiet street, I understood the magnitude of the injustice that was taking place. It wasn't just about honor. It wasn't just about image. It was about someone trying to take something from me, with lies. Everything that I've spent a lifetime building. My name, my character, my relationship with my daughter, and the roof I called home. The revelation came in layers. First, distrust. Then came the rumors. Then, the neighbors. And finally, the stark truth. My son-in-law was using my daughter as a stepping stone to get what was mine. And in the process, he was destroying precisely what no amount of money can buy, the trust between a father and a daughter. I took a deep breath, very deep, because from that moment on, I knew I wasn't just dealing with a family conflict. I was dealing with someone willing to rewrite my entire story, just to sign my name on a document I hadn't even seen yet. I stood there for many minutes, absorbing the truth that had been delivered to me with enough force to break anyone. The neighbor, after pouring out everything she had kept inside, went back inside without looking back, as if she were afraid that someone might suddenly appear and realize what she had said. And there, with the light wind passing through the silent street, I realized that there was no way to escape this reality anymore. The truth was clear, hard, painful, suffocating. My son-in-law was manipulating my daughter. My daughter had believed it, and part of the lie had been constructed, using my name. But what to do with this truth? How can I use it without hurting the person I loved most in my life even more? How could I reveal something so devastating without pushing her even further into the emotional abyss she was already in? I took a deep breath, very deep. And despite the fear, the pain, the anger burning in my chest, I knew there was only one possible choice. I needed to save her, even if it meant I had to bleed a little more. I went back to the door, not with the same energy as the first time, not with the adrenaline of confrontation, but with the resigned strength of someone who carries a love that overcomes any humiliation. Once, two, three. The door did not open immediately. Perhaps she was crying. Perhaps he was forbidding it. Perhaps they were arguing. But I continued. Not aggressive, not pushy, just a gift. After the fourth tap, I heard the lock slide. The door opened slowly, and this time, my daughter appeared alone, without him behind her, without a shadow, without a male voice dictating what she should feel. Only her, and a devastated face. Her eyes were red, her nose was swollen, her lips trembled. She seemed smaller, fragile, shrunken into herself like a child carrying a weight greater than her shoulders can bear. "Dad," she whispered, her voice on the verge of breaking. "I'm sorry. Please. I'm sorry." I took a step forward, but stopped just inches from her. I didn't want to invade her space. I didn't want to pressure her. I didn't want to scare her. I wanted her to be the one to take the next step. "I need to understand," I said, my voice low and calm. "I need to hear you. Not him. You." She swallowed hard and, for the first time since I arrived, held my gaze. Her eyes were full of guilt, of fear, of confusion. She began, but her voice faltered. "I never meant to say those things, Dad. Never. But she pressed her chest against her chest. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting us. I thought that you were going to reject me." The word reject pierced through like a blade. "Reject you?" I repeated, incredulous. "Daughter, I waited for you. I cared for you. I loved you. There has never been a day in my life when you weren't a priority. How could I reject you?" She started to cry for real, big, desperate tears, falling uncontrollably. And when he tried to speak again, it all came out in pieces, confused, like an emotional dam finally bursting. He said that, if we didn't have stability, you would leave me aside, that you would give your house to someone else, that you didn't trust me, that you thought I made a bad choice marrying him. He said that you— She took a deep breath, sobbing. that you always controlled me, and I believed him. I believed him because he's my husband, because I thought he knew what he was talking about, because I was afraid everything would go wrong. She covered her face with her hands. She wept as if she were purging months, perhaps years, of manipulation. And when he started saying you were aggressive, that you were going to fight with us, that you wouldn't agree to sign any papers, She interrupted herself, trying to breathe. I didn't know who to believe. I didn't know what was true. I just wanted everything to be okay. My heart ached, not with anger towards her, with compassion, because now I could clearly see the extent of what they had done to my daughter. She wasn't against me. She was lost inside an emotional prison created by someone else. Daughter, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Look at me. She slowly lifted her face. Her eyes were two oceans of guilt. You know who I am, I continued. You know the life we've had together. You know the father I was. You know I never raised my voice to you. I never asked you to give up on your dreams. I never controlled you. I never belittled you. I never made you feel ashamed of existing. Never. She closed her eyes, as if each of my words sank too deep into her. I know, she confessed, crying. I know, Dad. I know, but he kept saying, until I started seeing you through his eyes. I got lost. I felt suffocated. And I was afraid you'd find out that what he wanted was... She stopped, and her pause hurt. He wanted my house, I finished firmly. He wanted my assets. He wanted me to sign everything. He wanted me to be the villain in the story so you wouldn't hear my side of the story, so you'd only hear his. Her reaction was like receiving an emotional blow. I feel so much, she repeated, like a mantra. So much, Dad. So much. So much. She took a step forward, then another one, until finally he threw himself into my arms. And there, in the middle of the doorway of the house where she was being manipulated, I held my daughter back as I held her when she was a baby, tightly, protectively, lovingly, with a feeling that only a father with a broken heart could have. She was crying. Me too. But it was a different kind of crying now. A cry of liberation, of healing. The truth has finally been discovered. After several long minutes, she stepped away, wiping her face, trying to regain her composure. Dad, I promise, she said, her voice choked with emotion, that this will never happen again. I'll leave this house. I'll fix this. But I need you. Please, don't abandon me. I placed my hands firmly on her shoulders and replied, I never abandoned you, and I never will. Now, we'll solve this together. At that moment, we heard a loud bang coming from the hallway. Heavy footsteps, the bedroom door slamming shut. The son-in-law appeared in the hallway like a storm about to explode. But this time, it wasn't my daughter who was trembling. It was him, because she had finally broken free from the narrative he had constructed, and it was by my side. Her strength in that moment brought the catharsis that every viewer feels when the truth finally triumphs over lies, when manipulation falls, when the bond between father and daughter resurfaces, stronger and purer than before. She took a step back, moving away from her husband, and said, It's over. I already know the truth. And at that moment, looking at her, I knew, despite all the pain, we were starting to rebuild, together, books. After my daughter took the most important step she could take, the step toward her own freedom, something changed inside me in a way I couldn't explain in simple words. It wasn't just the feeling of relief at finally knowing the truth, nor was it just the pain of discovering how far the lie had infiltrated. It was something bigger, deeper, as if a part of me, previously dormant, had finally awakened. I stood there for a few minutes, still at the door of the house that had almost destroyed our relationship. My breathing was heavy, my heart pounding slowly, as if my body needed time to process the weight of what had happened. My daughter, beside me, held my arm tightly, a strength that didn't come from dependence, but from decision. The strength of someone who finally chose to see, chose to understand, chose to be free. My son-in-law stood in the hallway, looking at us with a mixture of fury, frustration, and fear. It wasn't fear of me, but fear of losing the world he had tried to build, brick by brick on top of lies. He knew that, at that moment, the narrative had crumbled, the strategy had been dismantled, and the power he thought he had over it was gone. My daughter wiped her face with the palm of her hand and took a deep breath. Then, without hesitation, she walked past him, grabbed a backpack from her room, and came back to me. She didn't look back. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't beg. She didn't explain. Her attitude was silent, firm, a choice made with her heart and conscience. And when she came out the door and stood beside me, I realized that that house, so new, so beautiful, so well planned, no longer symbolized the future. It symbolized a prison. We walked out together. She closed the door gently, as if closing a chapter of her life. And as I descended the steps, I felt something inside me closing as well. A long cycle. A painful cycle, but a necessary one. When we reached the sidewalk, she stopped, took another deep breath, and said, "Dad, I should never have believed him. You were always by my side, even when I didn't see it, even when I didn't deserve it." I looked at her calmly, and for the first time in a long time, she seemed completely herself, without fear, without manipulation, without the shadow of someone dictating what she should feel. I placed my hand on her shoulder. "Daughter, sometimes," I said, my voice low but firm, "the truth comes from other people, because those we love are afraid of hurting us. You're afraid of disappointing them. You're afraid to admit that you trusted the wrong people." She lowered her gaze, as if those words pierced directly through her most vulnerable spot. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she repeated. "I was just scared of everything." No," I replied, "and I don't judge you for it. We've all been afraid. We've all trusted the wrong people. The important thing is what we do afterwards." That phrase seemed to deeply affect her. She took a deep breath and looked at me with a gaze that mixed regret and strength. A different kind of strength, a new kind, a strength of reconstruction, of starting over. That's when I realized that, despite all the pain, there was an opportunity there, not to erase what happened, because that wouldn't be possible, but to rebuild what we had from the ground up with more maturity, more clarity, more truth. We walked to my car. The sky was beginning to change color, with thin clouds passing by quickly. It was as if even the weather reflected the intensity of that moment, a mixture of ending and beginning. Before going inside, my daughter held my hand. "Dad," she said, her voice much firmer than before, "this will never happen again. I promise I'll never let anyone make you the villain in my life again. You're my father. You always have been. And I let anyone mess with what was ours. Never again." I smiled. Not that broad, celebratory smile, but a smile filled with emotion and freedom. Because, in the end, the truth had prevailed. The mask had fallen. The manipulation had been exposed. And the two of us were on the right side of the door. As we got into the car, I felt a profound change within me. I was no longer the same man who had received that phone call that morning, nor the same man who had walked through the neighborhood being judged for lies he didn't even know existed, nor the same man who had almost collapsed upon hearing what his daughter had said about him. I was someone stronger, more aware, pay closer attention, with new limits, not out of pride but out of necessity. Life taught me something right there, in that instant, that I should have learned sooner. Love doesn't need to accept everything. It just needs to remain true. And staying true to yourself sometimes requires saying no. It requires setting limits. It requires recognizing when someone has gone too far. It requires protecting, including those we love. My daughter rested her head on the seat and closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. She seemed to be catching her breath, regaining her identity, regaining awareness of who she was before the manipulation became routine. As I drove out of that neighborhood, the neighborhood that had witnessed our separation and was now witnessing our reunion, I felt a strange lightness settle in my chest. It was as if I had weathered a storm that nearly swept me away, but which, in the end, left the sky clearer. Before turning the corner, I looked in the rearview mirror. The house was still there, beautiful, quiet, motionless, but now without the weight of the lie it harbored. My daughter then opened her eyes and said, "Dad, thank you for not giving up on me." And it was there, in that simple and pure phrase, that I felt complete catharsis. The pain is fading away, evil being exposed, the truth taking its place. Love, true love, reassuming its place. I took her hand. "I never gave up," I replied, "and I never will." And for the first time in a long time, I felt that she believed. When we left the neighborhood behind, I knew there was still a lot to sort out. Paperwork, separations, difficult conversations, but none of that seemed as big as before, because now we had the most important thing, the truth, and the freedom that came with it. If this story has captivated you this far, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me bring you more intense stories like this one. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if your own daughter asked you not to go to her house?